السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أنفقتم من شيء فهو يخلفه وهو خير الرازقين. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ما نقص مال عبد من صدقة. صدق الله مولانا العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Respected friends and elders, we're continuing on with the topic of attaining barakah in the Rizq, and we've gone over quite a few of them so far. I've lost track of which number we're on now at this point, alhamdulillah. But there are so many different ways of attaining barakah in the Rizq, which this goes to show that there are so many ways of attaining barakah in the Rizq. And today we have another list that we'll be doing. Hopefully we'll be completing it today, inshallah. This is on the topic of Sadaqah. So oftentimes we hear about charity, we hear about the importance of charity, we hear that there are so many virtues of giving charity, but then we oftentimes, due to limitations of time or constraints, whatever else it may be, we only hear one or two virtues of Sadaqah. And so it's scattered, but generally we know a few of these virtues, but it's scattered over different lectures. And so today I'd like to begin and hopefully conclude this topic of the virtues of Sadaqah, including how it will increase your rizq, including how giving away money will actually increase money for you. So we'll speak about this. I've listed 15 ahadith, 15 different ways Sharia has spoken about the virtues of Sadaqah. There are more than these 15. I've limited the number to 15. Once I hit 15, I said, okay, this is, I won't finish it today, unlikely, but at least 15 is a good number to stop at. So there are 15 virtues of charity which we'll speak about today. Inshallah, we'll go through them, and hopefully you all will follow along and understand each and every single virtue as sourced by Quran and Hadith, inshallah. So the first virtue of charity with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually includes two in this one hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Inna sadaqa la tudfi'u ghadab Allah wa tadfa' mitat as-su." He says that charity definitely, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Inna sadaqa." Inna means definitely, it's an emphasis. Right? So he says definitely charity la tudfi'u. La also here is for ta'kid. It's also here for emphasis. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he does two. He uses two emphasis, and he says definitely charity la tudfi'u ghadab Allah. This extinguishes the anger of Allah, wa tadfa' mitat as-su, and also it prevents from a terrible death. So these will be the first two virtues of charity. One is that it extinguishes the anger of Allah Ta'ala. We find that in just as a fire extinguisher extinguishes fire, similarly this charity extinguishes the anger of Allah Ta'ala. Rasulullah did not say it removes, he did not use any other word except for the word extinguish, which goes to show that it completely obliterates, it completely removes the anger of Allah Ta'ala. And secondly, when you give charity, you will find that because of the blessings of this charity, Allah Ta'ala will save you from a bad death. This is what we all want protection from, right? We know, unfortunately, so often we hear tragic deaths, we hear deaths of children, we hear deaths of young adults. We hear recently some in New York, if I'm not mistaken, one person he fell into, they were all on the lake, one fell into the water, the other brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, went in to save him. He also could not, and he drowned as well. And then the sister-in-law, she also went inside and she's on life support. This was like a week ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is unfortunate, but this is the reality which happens to many, many of us, unfortunately. Many of our family members, many of our loved ones as well. And so we pray that Allah Ta'ala saves us from these difficult deaths. Allah Ta'ala saves us from these untimely deaths. Right? And the way to do that life insurance only kicks in when? After you die. Right? Life insurance only kicks in after you die. That's the only time that, and we're not talking about the legalities of life insurance, we're not getting to that topic. But we're speaking about obviously life insurance, health insurance. These things happen, or these things kick in once the problem occurs, not before that. And so the sadaqah, it kicks in before. When you give charity, immediately it starts preventing your untimely deaths. It starts preventing all the problems, right? All the difficult or the terrible deaths that could have happened to us. Charity blocks it physically, blocks those untimely deaths. And so these are the first two rewards or first two virtues of charity. The third, similar, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a lengthier hadith, he says, وَالصَّدَقَةُ تُطْفِئُ الْخَطِيَّةَ كَمَا يُطْفِئُ الْمَاءُ النَّارَ. He says that charity extinguishes sin. He uses the word extinguish again here as well. Rasulullah used the word extinguish here again. He says charity extinguishes sin, just as water extinguishes fire. He explicitly mentions this. Right? And so we understand this is the third virtue of charity. The fourth virtue of charity, and again, if I go through the lengthier hadith, the entire hadith, we will not be able to cover it. So therefore, I'm only selecting the portion of the hadith which is applicable to charity. The fourth is that charity protects an individual from the fire of Jahannam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ وَلَوْ بِشِقِّ تَمْرَةٍ. He says that safeguard yourself or fear the fire of Jahannam, even if it may be through a piece of date. Right? Even if it may be through a piece of date, save yourselves from the fire of Jahannam. Right? And so when you give even a single date, hopefully if you give that with the proper ikhlas and proper sincerity, Allah Ta'ala will safeguard you from the fire of Jahannam, even through that one small date. And then the fifth is that, and this is also a famous hadith which we know, is that the donor, he'll be under the shade of Allah's throne. He'll be under the shade of Allah's throne. There's a lengthy hadith. Rasulullah says, that there will be 7 groups of people who will be under the shade of Allah's throne, and there will be no shade except the shade of Allah's throne on the day of judgment. And one of the people will be رَجُلٌ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقَةٍ, a person who gave sadaqah, فَأَخْفَاهَا, he gave it secretly, حَتَّى لَا تَعْلَمَ شِمَالُهُ مَا يُنْفِقُ يَمِينُهُ, to the extent that his left hand does not know what his right hand gave. To the extent that his left hand does not know what his right hand gave. Right? And so that there are different circumstances where you should give charity secretly. Most cases you should give charity secretly. Sometimes it's better to give charity openly. The reason for that is when you giving charity will be a means for others giving charity. If you know that if I give charity openly now, this will be a means of others giving charity. For example, oftentimes we see this, and we should do this. We give charity to our children, and we tell that our children that go put this in the donation box, or go do this, or go give this to the orphan, or go give this to the poor person. Right? So therefore, obviously, you're making your child aware. You're making others aware of your charity. But this is what? This is a good practice. That child growing up, that child will realize that I should also take care of those less fortunate than me. The people who don't have the same blessing that I have, they should also be helped and assisted. And so this is the fifth virtue of giving charity, which is that the donor will be under the shade of Allah's throne. In another hadith on the same topic, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, amazing hadith. He says that each individual will be under the shade of his charity until the decision is made amongst the people. Meaning, can you imagine this? Most of us, we travel frequently, and so you have long layovers. Sometimes what you do is you get these lounges or whatever else you call them. You have these lounges, whether it's part of the airline or whatever it is, you have these lounges and you go and you relax there. You're relaxing there, and if you're a priority member, whatever it may be, they'll take you to a secret lounge, and from there directly you'll board the plane. Right? And so basically this is what charity does. Charity, when you give sadaqah, you will remain under the shade of that sadaqah, whereas everyone else will be judged Everyone else will go through the normal processing and you will go through that VIP processing. Why? Because of your charity. Because of your charity, Allah Ta'ala will save you from having to go through the general population, and you'll go through the VIP line. And you'll be saved from the torments of the Day of Judgment, simply because of your charity. So far, these are amazing virtues, right? This is what? 5 virtues solely based on one action. On one action, there are 5 virtues so far we listed. We move on. The 6th is that Rasulullah he says, Dawu marwakum bis-sadaqah. He says, cure your sick through charity. Dawu marwakum bis-sadaqah. Right? Dawu is like give medicine, right? Give medicine to your sick by giving charity. Meaning, when someone gets sick, either you or a family member, you should give charity. This is a way to remove that sickness. We understand most of us, when we face an issue, what do? We go directly to the banks, we go directly to whoever else we think, we call someone else first, our lawyers, whoever else it may be. We go to others, we go to humans before we turn to Allah Ta'ala. That should never be the case. We should always turn to Allah Ta'ala first for any and all problems that we face. For any and all problems, we should turn to Allah Ta'ala alone. And then we adopt the means. And then we go to the lawyer, and then we go to the doctor, and then we go to everyone else. But primarily, we turn to Allah Ta'ala first. You turn to Allah, you make dua, you give some sadaqah, and then you embark and you go on and you adopt the means. So this is the 6th way this is the 6th virtue of sadaqah. So not only does it remove physical sicknesses, the 7th virtue is that it removes sicknesses of the heart. Rasulullah once a man came to him and he complained that I have a very harsh heart, a very hard heart. He complained about the hardness of his heart. Meaning, what happens? This is maybe some of us will resonate to this, right? When we see something bad happen, a tragic, something very terrible happening, we don't shed a single tear. We're not affected at the least. Nothing happened. We move on with our day as if nothing happened. We hear terrible news, and it's just a normal day for us. 10 people passed away. Oh, only 10 people. Only 10 people died in that crash. Only. Right? We think we are unaffected by these things. When we hear about emotional things, we don't cry. Why? Because our hearts are hard. Our hearts are hard. And so one person complains, and we don't even realize, we don't realize that we're so, we're completely turned off from this emotion. We don't have this emotion. And we think, unfortunately, we've been deluded into thinking that it's manliness. That when you hear an emotional hadith, it's manliness not to cry. We've been deluded into thinking this. That when we hear emotional news, we are not crying. Or we're not emotional about it. This is a delusion. Instead, it's part of human nature to be able to cry, to be able to express our emotions, especially when difficult news are given to us. Of course, different people, they process differently. So, of course, just because a person is not crying does not mean that they're not grieving. Understand that differently. Nevertheless, a person complained to Rasulullah that he complained about the harshness of his heart. Rasulullah he said, he gave him 2 advice. He said, the person who has this difficulty, who faces this difficulty of having a harsh heart, Rasulullah he said, if you wish to soften your heart, the first thing you should do is feed the poor. Feed the poor. The second, second is that you place your hand over the head of the orphan. Spend time with the orphan, right? Physically also. You touch his head, this will give you also physical contact with the orphan. This will be, of course, sometimes we don't see our orphans here, right? Most of us, our parents, they pass away at a later age, right? And so we don't see this. We don't see orphans. Whereas when we go back to our respective countries, we find many orphans. And when you see them, you should be, of course, you should be humble, you should be respectful, and you should be loving towards them because they don't have that love. They may not have that love amongst the rest of the family. They're missing out on the love of their father. And so therefore, you should touch the head of the orphan. Rasulullah used to do this. And so, two things to soften your heart: feed the poor and touch the heads of the orphans. And the eighth, the eighth virtue of giving charity, Rasulullah, he mentions that the angels, they make dua for the people who give charity. He says that every single day, there's not a single day that humans, they wake up except that there are two angels that come down. So then one of them says, Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa. Oh Allah, the one who gives for your sake, give him something better. That's the first angel. The second angel makes the dua, Allahumma a'ti mumsikan talafa. Oh Allah, the one who doesn't give, the one who hoards money, the one who withholds, Allah, give him destruction. The angel makes dua for those people who give charity. On the other hand, the one who hoards and the one who doesn't fulfill the rights of his wealth, the angel makes bad dua against him. The angel makes bad dua against that person. And so this is the eighth virtue of giving charity. Ninth, in a hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, this is amazing. He says, he said, three things I swear on these three things. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is saying this. He's saying, three things I swear upon. And so he carries on and he said, I'm telling you these things, you should memorize them. I'm not saying this, Rasulullah is saying this. He says, three things I swear on, and I'm telling you these things, you should memorize. You memorize these three things. One of the three things, he says, he says that not a single dollar, the wealth of an individual does not decrease through charity. This is the promise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, we've gone through 8, 9 of them so far. But understand, these are the virtues of giving charity. 9, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that there are three things that I swear upon. I'm telling you these things, learn them well and memorize them. The first, he says that a person's wealth does not decrease by giving charity. We move on. If I go through every single hadith, we'll stay here all day. The 10th virtue of giving charity, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that once she had slaughtered an animal, right? She slaughtered a sheep, and when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came home, right? Within that time frame, Aisha radiallahu anha, she donated everything. She slaughtered a sheep and she donated all of it, except for the shoulder, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved the shoulder piece. And so Aisha radiallahu anha, she saved that piece for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine, right? What do we do? Think about our own situation. What do we do? We take food, we consume it, whatever we don't want, we give that away. Yes? This is my situation, this is our situation. We eat whatever we want, whatever we don't want, we give it away. Or it goes in the garbage, unfortunately. And so Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that they slaughtered the animal and she donated the entire animal except for the shoulder. Again, I can go into every single one of these ahadith very deeply, but we won't find time. Can you imagine? In this house of the Prophet ﷺ, it's not that the Prophet ﷺ had access to meat, like how we have access to meat. We're constantly, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we have meat. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ, weeks would go by and he would not have food. Weeks would go by, he would not have food. He would only have coarse bread, maybe, if that, he would have coarse bread. Otherwise, it would be aswadain. It would be dates and water. That was all the food of the Prophet ﷺ. For weeks, not days, not hours, weeks on end, the Prophet ﷺ would only eat dates and water. And so in that household, a goat was slaughtered and given And Aisha radiallahu anha, she donated the entire thing. She only kept the shoulder for the Prophet because she knew that Rasulullah loved him. And so Rasulullah came home and he asked, what happened? He said, what remains? What remains from the animal? Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, مَا بَقِيَ مِنْهَا إِلَّا كَتِفُهَا. She says that nothing remains except for the shoulder, meaning everything else was distributed. So she assumed that Rasulullah was saying, okay, what's remaining of the animal? She says that nothing remains except for the shoulder. Rasulullah, he says, no. بَقِيَ كُلُّهَا غَيْرَ كَتِفِهَا. He said instead, the entire animal remains except for the shoulder. Meaning to show and to teach us that whatever we give in charity, it's not gone. It's not that you give it and it's gone, you'll never see it again. Instead, when you give it, you're actually storing it in an account of the akhirah. You're actually storing it in the account of the hereafter. And so therefore, you will see that money again. Whatever you keep for yourself, you will not see it. But whatever you give away, that's the amount that you will retain, and that's the amount that you will see in the akhirah. This is hadith number, we're running short on time. Hadith number, virtue number 10. Virtue number 11, Allah Ta'ala, he says, he speaks in the Quran, he says, إِنَّ الْمُصَدِّقِينَ وَالْمُصَدِّقَاتِ وَأَقْرَضُوا اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ وَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ. He says, those who give charity from the men and women. In this ayah, he clarifies, Allah Ta'ala generally just mentions those who give charity, but in this ayah, Allah Ta'ala specifically mentions men and women separately. I won't go into the reason why, because there are many wisdoms of Allah as to why he mentioned both. But nevertheless, Allah mentions that those men and women who give charity, right, and also the people who give a loan, the people who loan money to others. Right? In Islam, we don't have this concept of interest, or we don't believe in this concept of interest, where you give a person a loan and you expect a percentage back. Right? We don't believe in that. In actual reality, it's against the principles of Sharia, and we know the different ayat and the severe warnings against the people who indulge in interest. But nevertheless, Allah Ta'ala said, يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ وَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ. For the people who give in charity and the people who give loans, for them, Allah Ta'ala will multiply these for them. يُضَاعَفُ لَهُمْ. Allah Ta'ala will multiply for them. That's it. He doesn't mention anything. He just says multiply for them. It can mean Allah will multiply the wealth. It can mean Allah will multiply the rewards also. Not only that, وَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ, and they will have a noble reward in the akhirah. This is virtue number 11. Virtue number 12. For those people who give charity, there's a special door of Jannah that will be specifically for them. Rasulullah, he says that there's specific doors for people who fast. The people who constantly fast, they will have a separate door for them of Jannah. That door of Jannah will call them that you come to me. We want to go to Jannah. That Jannah will call the people who give charity, the people who fast. There will be specific doors for them. Right? This is virtue number 12. Virtue number 13. Rasulullah, he says that there's no jealousy except for two people. Meaning that you should not be envious for anyone except two. Meaning, if jealousy were to be permitted, it would be permitted in these two people. The one is the one who recites the Quran day in and day out. He recites the Quran day and night. That person, you should be envious of this person. Second is the person who Allah Ta'ala gave wealth, and that person he gives charity day in and day out. These are the two people you should be, and you can be envious of these two people. The one who Allah Ta'ala gives Quran and he reads it day in and day out. The one who Allah Ta'ala gives wealth, and that person gives charity day and night. Number 14, the hadith, this is advice for the businessmen, the people who are involved in business. Rasulullah, he said, Ya ma'ashara tujjar. He said, all people of business, all businessmen, in the he says that in the sale or in the marketplace, oftentimes you find idle talk and you find false oaths. Other narration mentions you find lies as well. When in the marketplace, what happens, right? Nowadays you have fixed prices, but generally back in the days you have barter, you have so many other things. Right? In other countries you find it very common as well. Right? And so in the marketplace, there's idle talk and there's false oaths. Someone will say, by Allah, this is so nice, and there's so many stories that come to my mind, but I won't mention any of them because we don't have time. And so he says that, listen, in the marketplace, there are these idle talks and these false oaths. And so therefore, فَشُوبُوهُ بِالصَّدَقَةِ, and so therefore avoid it or cleanse it by giving sadaqah. Cleanse it by giving sadaqah. This is the way. It's the 14th virtue and 15th final virtue of giving charity. Rasulullah, and this is tied in with, of course, the topic that we've been doing is Barakah and Rizq. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah Ta'ala said, Allah Ta'ala, Ibn Adam unfiq alayh, that, O son of Adam, you give charity, I will give to you. This is the promise of Allah Ta'ala. This is the promise of Allah Ta'ala. This is not my promise, this is no human's promise. This is the promise of Allah Ta'ala. These are all the 15 virtues of giving charity. Also, I want to make a disclaimer, especially at the end, that just because I'm speaking about charity does not mean I'm speaking about charity to our organization. This is charity to anyone. You give charity to the poor, you give charity to the orphans, you give charity to masajid, you give charity to the madaris, and so on and so forth. You give charity to anyone. Right? Sometimes people, they think I have like an ulterior motive. I'm not saying this that at the end of the day you should go give charity at the back. I'm not saying that. If you want, by all means, you can. Don't worry. But if you want to give charity to someone else, by all means, remember these 15 virtues. If you can, write these down. The video is recorded and it's on YouTube. You can go and write down these virtues. Write down all of these virtues of giving charity and try to remember them when you're giving charity. When you're giving charity, remember, I'm giving charity for selfish reasons. We're all very selfish people. I'm giving charity for my own selfish reason because of these 15 virtues and many other virtues as well. But these 15 virtues that we have mentioned here, Allah Ta'ala allow us to be generous. Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand and practice. Allah Ta'ala allow us to give in abundance of charity. Allah Ta'ala allow us to be recipients of all of these rewards. Jazakumullah khairan wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.